Okay. Good afternoon, Hampton Bays. This is Mr. Clemensen, the Superintendent of Schools. I am joined today in a conversation with some of our student journalists from the high school publication, The Tide. The Tide is a print newspaper that publishes several times during the year at Hampton Bays High School, covering all aspects of student life and community life. And today I'm joined by Mrs. Maresca, who is our journalism teacher and newspaper advisor, as well as an English teacher at Hampton Bays High School. Julia Hemming, who is the editor-in-chief of The Tide. Ian Hubbard, our copy editor for The Tide, and Kira Hughes, news editor for the newspaper. We're going to talk about all things COVID, all things school closure, and any questions that are on the minds of students. So we're going to take about a half hour to be together, and we're going to post this widely so that we can hear the student perspective and give you the chance to answer any questions that are on the students' minds. So Julia, as the editor-in-chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Clemensen. So I have a couple of questions about distance learning. So first, how do you expect that changes to standardized testing will be affecting teaching in the district?
So standardized tests, most of them have been canceled for this year, as we know. AP tests will come in the next week or so. But Regents exams, which were first administered in November of 1865, I did a little homework last night, are canceled. And it's mind-boggling, right? Like, how could we not have Regents exams? That's what we do in New York State. And somehow we're all going to survive, and we're all going to be okay and move on with our studies. So I think distance learning is challenging the way that we're thinking about school, and whether or not standardized tests in every subject or the way we knew them are the way we're going to move forward. It's certainly hard to take an assessment that is supposed to be blind, perhaps, or solo with no notes or open books when you're alone in your room or at your dining room table or wherever you're doing work. So I think the distance learning plans that our teachers have put forward have tried to control for that, so that maybe it's not a test to assess your knowledge. Maybe it's a project or an assignment where our teachers can get a sense for whether or not a student is mastering the material versus a traditional standardized test that would run through a Scantron machine. So in some cases, I think we'll see that continue, but in other cases, I think we're seeing kids and teachers be successful in saying, oh, there's a new way we can assess student learning, and it's not necessarily a multiple choice test with an essay at the end.
Are you finding that students are maintaining a similar level of productivity through distance learning as they normally would in school?
It's a great question. So we are a business that has 2,100 customers. Those are our students. And we used to have three store locations, Hampton Bays Elementary, Middle, and High School. And on March 16th, we turned our business model upside down. We still serve 2,100 customers, but instead of 3 store locations, we have 1,700 store locations. That's 1,700 households across Hampton Bays, because they're siblings, as you know. So the levels of productivity are all over the map. I've talked to some seniors who, I'm going to just change my speaker here. I've talked to some seniors who are sleeping until 2 in the afternoon because they're not going to bed until 4 in the morning. I hope that's not any of you three. I've talked to kids who are getting up and having breakfast and getting their work done in their first 2 to 3 hours, and then they go outside and they work in their yard because they like to garden, or they have a boat that they want to get ready for the summertime. So I think productivity is all over the map. What it has taught me through this process is that there are some kids who really thrive in this model and that are really doing a really good job. I told you just before, Regents exams have been in place since November of 1865. School kind of looks the same as it did in 1865 in many ways. This, if there's an opportunity in this very challenging time, it might be to rethink education, and it might be to rethink how kids best learn. Some kids learn best in 7 hours going through their day and having those experiences. Other kids don't. Is there a way that school can handle both of those things? We're going to have to figure that out in the coming months. So I think teachers are doing their best to contact kids to keep them in the game. But we also understand that some kids are facing significant challenges right now. Some kids are struggling with social isolation, depression, anxiety, that even when we were in school, they struggled, and in these challenging times struggle more. It's hard to be productive when you're facing challenges like that. So we're trying to connect kids with our school social worker, Ms. Vargas, our counselors. Teachers are reaching out to try to keep kids motivated and positive. But productivity isn't always just I'm into the work or I'm being a little lazy today. Some real challenges exist that are preventing kids from being maybe as productive as they would want to be.
Have you started creating or planning to create activities or programs that would help connect staff and students who are experiencing what you just listed of depression or anxiety that is affecting their productivity?
Yep. So our counselors are running either they're running, and then hopefully we'll be evolving and adding more small group Zooms like this where we can connect with one another to stay positive and to stay connected. We're also going through the process. Mr. Richard reached out to all the club advisors today because we want to consider which clubs can still run. You know, there's certain clubs that might not be able to run anymore, but there's an opportunity for kids to get onto Zoom or a Google Meet and connect with one another and not have it be about the novel that we're reading, sorry, Ms. Maresca, or the algebra homework that we're doing, that there might be a social aspect or a service aspect to us connecting with one another. And hopefully that starts to break down the walls of social isolation and connect kids to what for some kids was the reason they came to school. Right? The basketball team, the student newspaper, band, key club. Those were the connections that were most positive to them. So we're going to start to see those things come online in the coming weeks, now that we know that we have an extended closure through the end of the school year.
Speaking of that, I saw that tutoring has now been shifted to be resumed via Zoom. So what benefits do you think that will create during this time of distance learning?
So I missed the first part of the question. What shifted?
Peer tutoring has been put online to be resumed with Zoom. So how do you think that will benefit students during this time?
Peer tutoring is amazing because it's a low risk environment for kids to get the help that they need, right? So sometimes it's hard to ask an adult for help. Sometimes it's when you ask the adult for help, it's tied to a grade, and there's that stress and anxiety of I have an assignment. But when you have a relationship with an upperclassman and a lowerclassman or peer-to-peer, the risk is very low, and friends can help one another out. And if we can facilitate that where two friends can get into a Zoom breakout room and talk to one another, it takes the anxiety down a little bit. It provides a connection between kids, which may not just be about algebra or geometry. It may be about connecting and how are you? And it might not be just about the content either. It could be about what are your work study habits? Are you getting up and taking a shower? Are you doing your Zoom work or your classwork from your bed? Maybe you go to your dining room table to do it after you've taken a shower and put on clothes for the day and not your PJs. All of those work study habits that if I said it, oh, it's Mr. Clemensen saying it. But if a student says it to another student, it's like, oh, I should try that. So I think it's going to lower the anxiety and hopefully give kids positive connections with one another.
My list of questions is glitching out and won't load. So I'm going to shift and let Ian ask some questions now.
Great.
All right. So, Mr. Clemensen, I have a few questions on our current situation. So we had the announcement from Governor Cuomo that schools would be closed for the rest of the curricular season. But how often is there communication between you and the New York Board of Education?
So I spend most of my days on Zoom, and human nature, as much as I'm looking at your wonderful faces. I still keep looking into my own screen to see, do I look okay? Is that a blemish? I look at myself all day on Zoom because we're constantly talking to the New York State Education Department. We're talking to superintendents in the region, talking to superintendents across the state. In an hour, I have a leadership meeting with 15 superintendents around the state where we're going to start talking about what happens when we reopen. So we know that, so teachers are a certain type of people, right? I was a teacher, Ms. Maresca, you know Ms. Maresca, she's like this, right? So teachers are a certain way. We're type A. We like to know that third period is 10, 12 in the morning and I can go to the bathroom then. And that's when I go to the bathroom. We like to know what happens at a certain time. So the pandemic and the closure has been overwhelming sometimes because there's a lot of questions and there's a lot more questions than answers. And so I've been very pleased with the state education department because they have said, schools, you need to do the best you can. You need to connect with your kids. You need to connect with your teachers, and you need to be fair. So the state education department has not said, you must still take the Regents exam. You must do this. You must do that. They're very sensitive to kids and the needs that we're facing. So we're talking almost every single day about everything from what are you doing for your spring concert, for all your musicians that have been practicing, to what are you going to do when we come back in September if we have to socially distance? How do I put 50 kids on a school bus? So we're asking every type of question almost every day.
And how has the district been supporting families who are struggling financially because of the closure of the schools?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So every week we conduct a wellness call for every student. So I can watch a Google form every Monday and Tuesday, and it's populating quickly. 300, 600, 900, 1,100 phone calls. And we're collecting data every week, and we're able to see if something changes in a student's life. So has their work habit changed? Are they now a little bit more food insecure than they were last week? Can we get food to them? So we ran almost 600 meals today, or 600 students were served with meals today. We do that every single day between 10 and 12 in the morning. So 600 kids is a little less than a third of the entire district. They get a breakfast and a lunch, and it can either be done by driving through the middle school bus loop and picking it up, or our bus company is driving them to people's houses. On Friday, kids get 3 times the food that they would normally get Monday through Thursday. So it gets them through Saturday and Sunday as well. On Wednesdays and Fridays, for any member of the community, we run a food distribution in the elementary school loop. So that's not just for kids, that's for anybody in the community or surrounding communities. They drive through and they get a number of meal items: frozen meat, vegetables, bread, other proteins like beans, eggs, for families in need. Today we did 82 cars and served over 100 individuals with that service. We work with Island Harvest Food Bank for that. A number of our nonprofits are so generous. So they call up and they say, Lars, I have $1,000. I want to give it to you. Go put it to need. And so we have an account that exists where if the food delivery that week doesn't have meat, because the supply chain at the grocery stores or the distribution facilities were not able to give us that in our distribution, we use creative means to go to King Cullen and try to supplement. So a number of organizations have been helpful there. I spoke to Ms. Vargas this morning. We have kids whose families are having trouble paying the rent, and it's a scary time. Today's May 1st, and so bills are due on May 1st. And we've had a number of families who have been facing the threat of eviction or losing their home. The law prevents that right now. But if you're scared and you're in crisis, you don't necessarily have the strength or the knowledge that, hey, the law protects me from being evicted. You can't do this to me. You're in a trauma situation. You're overwhelmed. It's a crisis. And so when we know that information, people like Ms. Vargas or me or Mr. Richard or our teachers can say, hold on, you have a right here, and we can connect families with the town of Southampton or other organizations that can step in and say, you can stay in that house for a little while longer, and we can help connect you to unemployment, or we can help connect you to other social services. So it's really hand-to-hand combat, to use that term, because it's changing minute by minute. This week, a family may have a job and money, and next week they may not, because the business closed or the job's not available anymore. That's why the weekly call is so important, so we can see if the weather is changing for certain families.
That was wonderful to hear. And then my final question is, what advice do you have for students of various ages to help them get through this pandemic?
Go outside, even if it's for 10 minutes. And I would offer that advice to adults too, that you get cooped up in your house and the weather has not been cooperative with us, right? Those gray days, I feel it on those gray days. And so the advice I would say is to learn about yourself, to take this opportunity to learn about yourself. I learned it took me 3 weeks of the closure. In week 3, I realized that between 4 and 5:30 in the afternoon, I was less patient, I was grouchier, I was frustrated, more easily frustrated. So I stop my work at 4 o'clock and I go outside, even if it's in my driveway, even if I just take the garbage out to the curb, I get a little fresh air and step away from the Zoom, because I knew that about myself, that at 4 o'clock I was getting frustrated and I wasn't doing good work at that point. I can come back to it, but I needed to step away. The other piece of advice that I would offer is to stay connected. It's funny that we said before the closure, put your phones down, get off the screen time, enough. Now we're saying, pick up the phone and call somebody, text somebody, reach out to them, right? That's so important right now, because social isolation, you don't even know what's happening. You can't give your friend a hug right now. You can't shake someone's hand or give a high five. You have a mask on, which is frightening to some people. It's an overwhelming time. And so we have to find the ways to break through that. So to Zoom with somebody on their 18th birthday, you all are going through that right now. To do a car parade if you can, and drive by and toot the horn. To pick up the phone or to open up a Zoom and not talk about schoolwork. The schoolwork will happen. We're going to have gaps in our learning. We know we are, because there's nothing that can replace being with a teacher and being with a classroom face to face. There's nothing that can 100% replace that. But we'll fix that. That's not life or death. We can fix that. We'll fix that in September. Any gaps that exist, we'll fill those potholes and we'll be fine. But making sure that we're socially and emotionally healthy is the most important thing that we can do now. That we're exercising, that we're not just eating chips and Doritos and cookies and putting on the quarantine 15, which I have, that we're exercising and our minds and staying connected to one another. That's the number one advice. Then get to your Google Classroom. But take care of your body and your mind first.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Clemensen. If Julia's questions haven't loaded in yet, I'll turn it over to Kira.
Hi.
I'm afraid Kira looks frozen right now, but if she wants to use the chat feature, I can take her questions through there as well while Julia finishes up with hers.
Am I completely frozen, or am I just standing still?
You're standing still and I can hear you, so that'll work too. So why don't we go to Kira's question?
All right, so I want to ask about the situation for seniors and what our situation is going to look like. What are we thinking for like the large social gatherings that are generally the peak of senior year, stuff like prom, graduation? So have you come up with any concrete plans for that so far?
So today was a big milestone for us because we needed to see what Governor Cuomo was going to say. But in the meantime, we've been trying to think in a lot of different buckets. So I met with the senior class officers earlier in the week with Mr. Richard to talk about all the different options. And we started the conversation by saying this: the events are going to look different, and that's going to come with, coming with that is a level of disappointment. We know that. high school prom, high school graduation, senior awards, senior cut day. I know that exists. All of those things are milestones in American school, right? And we think about them all the time. Getting your driver's license and parking in the senior lot, having extended lunch, you know, all of those things are milestone events. And so as adults, we don't say, oh, it's canceled, we're going to have to just get over that and move on, because we know that's a real loss. We know that the celebrations that are coming, that you've worked for 13 years for, are really important. And so whatever we do may come with a level of disappointment, but it doesn't mean we're not going to put our back into doing something as special as possible. We don't know what the social distancing requirements are going to look like for June in terms of graduation. 6 weeks, 8 weeks now is still a long way away for graduation, which is scheduled for June 26th, and a lot can change. So here's what we're thinking. Graduation is still going to be scheduled on June 26th. Great, we can run it, all good. If that cannot happen, we have a date reserved in August for the same tent, the same purple flower, well, maybe not the same ones, they'd be dead. New purple flowers, the white chairs, the graduation as we know it, the pomp and circumstance for August, before students leave for college. If we can't have that, some level of drive-through graduation or smaller group graduations where you can be present with your family. We're going to follow the guidance of public health officials to do that, but I can tell you it's not going to be me calling you on the phone or FaceTiming you saying, here's your diploma. You know, we're going to try to make it more special than that. Same with prom. If we can have prom the week of the last week of school as it's currently scheduled, wonderful. If we can't, we're going to have it at the end of July or August. If we can't, perhaps a way to consider having a prom is that when everybody's back from their first semester of college, right before Christmas, we have a prom. It's a reunion prom. You're the COVID class of graduates who have a crazy set of stories to tell. And it might be a great time for you to come back together and have a dance and have a prom in as special a way as we can make it. So in no circumstance are we saying, that's that, we got to cancel it and move on. Tonight at 8:20, it's Friday, May 1st. This is going to air next week, but Friday, May 1st at 8:20, which is 2020 military time, we're going to release a senior athlete video. Next week, we'll be working on our senior athletes who are going to play in college. The following week, we're going to be working on pushing out a slideshow of senior college and college, military, and workforce commitments. And we're going to push out a survey for any senior who wants to participate, asking about their favorite high school memory, their favorite candy, you know, a little bit of to build a profile. And then we're going to push that out on social media. So you're the senior spotlight for the day. So, or a couple of days. So we can program all of that to run because we do not want you to leave Hampton Bays without the ability to love you and to congratulate you and to celebrate you.
That's honestly like the perfect answer. That's all I could have hoped for.
Thank you.
And about graduation, with the distance learning, have there been any changes made to the requirements of graduating?
In some way, it's a great question, and in some ways it's become very flexible for schools. So kids who were scheduled to take a Regents exam in order to graduate and get a Regents diploma, if they pass the class, they are considered, that box is checked. So you used to have to get, for an advanced Regents diploma, the combination of Regents exams with honors designation. It had to be at a mastery level. To get a Regents diploma, you had to pass your 5 Regents exams. If there were any Regents exams that were outstanding and the student passed the class, all bets are off. They get to graduate. So there's not that panic and that stress and taking AIS and the nail biting, running to see if you passed after the rating teams have finished grading the Regents, which is adrenaline. And, you know, we cheer when that happens, but that's not going to happen this year. So the grades for students In the third marking period, no student was able to earn below a 65. So, and the grades that were submitted could only help a student's grade, not hurt a student's grade. I think that will have something similar developing for the fourth marking period as well. But the objective and the theme by which we're operating right now is to be flexible with students, to not do harm, and to give kids the benefit of the doubt who are living through a pandemic for the first time since 1918.
All right, great. Is there any indication that school will be resumed the normal date this fall, or what are we thinking about next year?
Yep. So the governor said today that that exact question was asked. So you can actually work for the New York Times because it was a New York Times reporter who asked it. And the governor said the fall is a very long time away.
Yeah.
So we're planning. I think I'm echoing here. We're planning to operate normally. We're planning to operate at a social distance. What does that look like? And I don't know the answer to that. Can we do split sessions where half the school goes early, half the school goes late? If we did, would the custodial team have enough time to do the cleaning regimen that might be required between session 1 and session 2? Now that we're doing distance learning and in some ways doing it really, really well, is that a component so that less kids are in the building each day, or we're alternating days? I don't know. So the best case scenario, and the one that I go to bed thinking about every night, is that we're going to be back as normal on September, whatever that date is. But we're going to prepare for anything that would look different than that as well. It could very well look different. At some point, your college lives next year and beyond are going to feel normal again. At some point, our K-12 life is going to feel normal again. We know it's not going to be in the next 2 months. It might not be in September, but we're going to do our best to make sure that all the things we just talked about, social isolation, school spirit, staying connected, and staying productive in learning, are still the most important things we're focusing on.
All right, that kind of addressed the other questions that I had prepared. Right. So, Julia, you find your questions?
Did, yes. So, Mr. Clemensen, earlier you had mentioned that you're connecting students with the school psychologist and the social worker during this time. Could you just expand a little bit on that? Tell us how you're connecting students with these people?
By every which way possible. So if a family is not comfortable Zooming, sometimes, Zoom is a very personal thing. I'm in all of your homes right now. You're in my office, but because I needed to get out of my house for a few minutes to my quiet office to do this. But my son has been on the Zooms. My unmade bed was on there one morning because I didn't realize it. Zoom is very personal. And so sometimes kids in crisis or families in crisis, it's very transparent, right? And I might not want to show you where I live. I might not, I might be concerned about that. There might be a lot of people in my house and I can't concentrate. So maybe a text message is more helpful then, or a phone call is more helpful where I can step outside and just take a private phone call with the counselor. Or maybe it's a Zoom like this where 5 of us are together and we're chatting and we're laughing. Or maybe it's a one-on-one Zoom. So we're, by all means possible, we're doing that.
Awesome, thank you. And my final question, obviously there have been large changes made to AP testing. So how is that affecting AP classes? So
the AP test is going to look different. Kids are going to take the AP test at home. It's going to cover the content that was covered through what I understand to be covered through the closure. They're going to be much more truncated, 45 minutes. It can be done on a Chromebook, I think, except the foreign language AP exams, because there's a recording component to that for speaking. And then in addition to the normal grading, the teachers would then have a review process to go through to see if the work that was produced during the AP assessment matches typically what the work was during the school year. So there's a quality control thing there to preserve the integrity. On the other end of this, I think as a country, we're going to say, did that work? Was that the right way to do it? And then if the answer is yes, maybe AP exams look different forever. If we say it was a failure or it didn't work, okay, we learned our lessons, and then we'll adapt moving forward. I think that's, as I lead the school district and I try to message to our amazing faculty and staff and our wonderful students and their families, is this time has taught me that what we do is not do or die. That if we make the best decision that we think at the time and it turns out to not be that, then we switch. And it's okay. That the world's not going to explode and we're going to be okay because we did the best we could. I made the best decision at the time that I could. It turned out to be totally wrong. So I'm going to make a new one now. And I'm going to change course a little bit. And I make a lot of wrong decisions. I say things that I think are right. And then a week later, what was I thinking? That didn't make sense. Why did I think that? And then I change course. This challenge has, whether it's AP exams, and maybe that's going to work, and maybe it's going to be a challenge, or anything, we are learning to give ourselves a break, to give ourselves, the generosity of spirit, we can call it, that we're doing the best we can. And if the answer is right, rock on. If it's not, let's switch it, and it's not too late to correct course. We're going to be okay.
And then with all of this distance learning, there's a huge technological component. I kind of just thought of this, but I'm talking to you from my cell phone and reading questions from my computer. What has using technology so much in everyday classwork taught the district about how you teach?
So I teach at the college level. I teach at Stony Brook in the graduate school for teachers aspiring to be principals. And the last time that I taught in a classroom, the best technology that I had was an overhead projector. It was that long ago. I had a chalkboard and an overhead projector, and that was my technology. There were no computers, anything like that when I was a teacher in the classroom. So when we went into closure, Stony Brook did too. So I had to learn Google Classroom. I had to learn Zoom. I didn't know those things either. Ms. Maresca, much more technologically advanced than I am. And we know that from the work that she did in the school. Everybody had a learning curve. On March 16th, I believe the number was 45 district-wide active Google Classrooms. By Friday of that first week, over 160. So I'm echoing, I think, again. So hold on. Is that better? Can you hear the echo? Okay, great. So I think it's taught us to shed some of the things that maybe were not as productive, but we did in our classroom because we always did them, right? And got down to the meat and potatoes, as my grandma used to say, my Irish immigrant grandma, the meat and potatoes of it. So to get down to just what we need to do, and let's not add extra things in there. Here are the assignments. Here's the concepts you need to master. So distance learning has provided us that opportunity. It's also provided a number of real challenges. So while every student in grades 3 through 12 had access to a Chromebook, we know that the Chromebooks, when you're Zooming, are not the best devices. We know that as time has gone on and families have faced greater economic hardship, maybe the optimum bill doesn't get paid this month, and that people's internet could be challenged. We know that when everybody's on the Wi-Fi, everybody's Wi-Fi works worse. And so those challenges have prevented it from being 100% perfect. At the same time, we know some families don't have Wi-Fi access at all. And so we've relied on a number of our nonprofit partners. We got a donation of $10,000 to purchase little Wi-Fi hotspots. They look like hockey pucks, with 12-month subscriptions for Wi-Fi access, because we identified 40 individuals prior to the lockdown. We sensed it was coming. So March 12th and 13th, we did a technology assessment. You might remember taking that in your class. Do you have access to Wi-Fi? We identified 39 kids district-wide who had no access to Wi-Fi at home. So we called a very wealthy benefactor out east. They live out in Bridgehampton, looking to help. And we said it would cost $9,600 to provide Wi-Fi access for a year to those 39 houses and one for good luck, to help a family, to help another family perhaps. The guy said, that's a no-brainer. I'll send the money over tomorrow. So it's great to have those community partnerships. It's great to always be cultivating them so that when you're in a crisis, you don't have to start to build those relationships. Those are people we could pick up the phone and say, we need help, and they were ready to help us. So we know that the distance learning is not perfect. It takes years to perfect it. At the college level, we did it over a weekend from March 13th to March 16th. So we continue to evolve. We know that it's a work in progress. So what we've learned today and what we're doing on Friday, May 1st is a lot different than what we were doing on Tuesday, March 14th. And it'll be different than what we're doing on June 1st.
So those are all of our questions.
Great. I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing as student journalists. I said this to our teachers as we went into closure, that this is why we became teachers, right? We became teachers to help kids and help families. And that happens every day in the classroom. But in a challenging time like this, it absolutely happens. Teachers are helpers. You all are becoming or are aspiring journalists. You're currently student journalists. It is so important that the right stories get told in the right ways, especially at a time of a global pandemic. So the work that you're doing stretches far beyond the four walls of Hampton-based high school. I'm really proud of the Tide, and thank you for that, for all the work that you're doing. We got to work together after Parkland, and we did some really great stuff. So the Tide has always been at the cutting edge of this, and you guys are leaders. I'm really proud of you. Mrs. Maresca, thank you for leading this group.
Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. This is really special for me. The kids, my journalism class, the Tide, they are really very special. And we're looking forward to putting out another issue during the quarantine as well. So you can be looking forward to that. Great.
Well, we'll get you in the building to print, and then we can distribute them in some creative way, digitally or in print. We'll work together on that.
We will.
Okay. All right.